Hi everyone, Vega here. With the upcoming release of the new Dune film, I thought it was time to revisit the world of Arrakis, also known as Dune of course, and the beautiful star of Canopus. What kind of world is Dune, and are the sci-fi versions accurate to the reality? So, let's get to it. First of all, we see some of the images over the years of the Dune planet, and the first thing that strikes us is the strange dark coloured areas in the northern hemisphere. It is believed that these are perhaps basins where once water flowed on the desert world, and indeed, as we see on this map and in the actual films themselves, all of the major settlements on Arrakis can be found within these brown-black areas, the rest of the planet being desert and perhaps uninhabitable. The precise chemical composition of Arrakis is mostly made of silicates. Light gases such as hydrogen and helium have escaped into space. Now, there exists a Dune Wiki site, which I'll link to in the description below, where I got much of this information from, and in that it's suggested that Arrakis revolves around Canopus at a mean distance of around 87 million kilometres. This is less than the distance between the Sun and the Earth, and seems very unreasonable, given that Canopus itself is a much more powerful star than the Sun, and indeed an A-class subgiant, in between the boundaries of giant and subgiant in fact. We'll see later how the habitable zone of Canopus extends much further out, meaning that the habitable zone at this distance, the planet of Dune, would need to have some very strange weather systems to somehow keep the surface cooler than it would otherwise be. This is as yet in the film as unexplained, and perhaps we need to take it as non-canon at this stage, that is, where Arrakis is found in the Canopus system, just at this point seems very unrealistic. It is, however, reported in the Dune books that there is an extensive dust cloud that permeates the Canopus system, and this could perhaps lead to Ice Age periods, with the dust cloud making the sunlight of Canopus opaque from time to time, and it could somehow mean that the Dune planet could become cooler than it would otherwise be. On Dune there may have been different types of settlements through the ages, medieval types with castles and turrets and walls as we see, or more contemporary ones like this one with statues, almost Lord of the Rings-esque design perhaps by the freemen, those that learned to survive in the desert on very little amounts of water. In the future, a depiction from one of the earlier Dune novels and how it was imagined. Now Canopus itself is quite an interesting star because it's in the process of the blue loop in its stellar evolution. As we can see here, once larger F and A-class stars of around 5 solar masses, perhaps a little bit more, leave the main sequence, they become much cooler and go into a red giant branch. Now, this is normal knowledge, but interestingly, once they've done that for a while, they actually then turn backwards and return to having surface temperatures back towards the 8000 Kelvin mark. So the star decreases in temperature, then re-increases for a small period in its lifetime, before going back to being red giant again. It's quite interesting, isn't it? And it must be quite strange for a planet like Dune, as it would completely go through different stages depending on where Canopus itself was on the stellar evolutionary chart, although this would obviously occur over millions, even possibly the low billions amounts of years. This isn't the only thing though, however, that could affect the Arrakis weather. It's thought there are other planets in the Canopus system, or at least it's mentioned within the Dune novels, 2 larger planets that have very irregular elliptical orbits, which could push and pull Dune and twist its orbit itself, meaning that Dune was pulled and pushed a lot further out from time to time, or perhaps more closer into the star than it would normally be. You can imagine the havoc that this might play on the Dune system, with perhaps huge dust storms that may form just like on Mars, and the strange seasons where Arrakis may go through large ice ages to be replaced at other times where Dune is far hotter than it would normally be. It seems almost like a Game of Thrones world, but in reverse, for those of you that know those novels. In stark contrast to our own star, the Sun, beginning at roughly 0.8 astronomical units, if we look at the habitable zone of the star of Canopus, its normal situation would begin at 98 astronomical units. Remember that we said earlier that planet Dune was estimated at around 0.5 astronomical units, so it does seem very unrealistic, doesn't it? And indeed, the habitable zone of Canopus doesn't begin until almost 2.5 times further out than the planet Pluto from our own Sun. And not only that, but it's a large habitable zone that reaches out all the way from 98 astronomical units to 173. Now, as I said, other planets in the system according to the Dune novels are large gassy worlds which have very regular elliptical orbits. They're sometimes nicknamed the twins, and you can imagine how they might push and pull arrakis out into very strange orbits which wouldn't always be circular. In some ways, what we're seeing is a very unstable system, or perhaps more accurately, a system that has regular irregularities within its own stability. Not only that, but Arrakis itself is thought to have two moons of its own, known as Krellin and Arvon. In the past, the third moon, which lay somewhere in Dune's ecliptic plane, was destroyed, and most of the debris landed on the planet's surface and also created a ring-like structure around Arrakis. It's also thought that the moons affect Arrakis' day-night cycle. On Arrakis, normal days are 22.4 standard hours, but this apparently can depend on where it is in its orbit and the effect the moons have on it as well. It's theorised that in very extreme circumstances, the Arrakis day could be shortened to as little as 3.8 hours, or indeed lengthened to as long as 51. So what we're learning from Arrakis is that it's not a stable world in the sense that Earth is. Composition of its atmosphere of 74% nitrogen, 23% oxygen, 1% argon mean that it's also mentioned in the Dune novels that the sky has a uniform dullness due to the scatterings of dust. But occasionally in the polar regions it can actually appear bluish with thin cirrus clouds, almost Earth-like, and this can be occasionally seen in the polar vicinities. Global wind speeds are roughly equivalent to planet Earth at an average of around 20 km per hour. Now we know that Dune is famous for its spice, the most precious material in the universe, and perhaps its strange irregularities within its orbit and the effect of its moon and other planets on the CANOPUS system, along with the dust and phasing of the star itself, have somehow created a perfect evolutionary storm, creating such an element or creating such spice. Maybe in no other place in the known universe has emerged such a strange, unstable system, yet stable with so many irregularities in it. We see that life has evolved on Arrakis, and somehow creatures like the worms, perhaps, of distant ancestors born during the ice ages of Dune, or when thawing occurred, and the climate was more hospitable to life, having somehow survived and then evolved into the Dune worms we see in the novels and films. Just like life on our own planet, the Earth, that started in the carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere, and as the planet evolved, so did the life forms. Going back to CANOPUS itself, also known of course as Alpha Carinae, it isn't really a star that you would expect to have life having a chance of being created for the reasons we've already outlined, like the tossing and turning of the star on the stellar evolutionary chart, for example. Not only that, but also CANOPUS is a large source of X-rays which are emitted from its corona, which again of course would be very problematic for life, particularly if the planet Dune was so close to the CANOPUS star. And again, however, maybe it's this that's contributed to the creation of spice, and the reason spice is so unique in the universe is perhaps because of this unusual nature of Arrakis. Of course, Paul Atreides, also known as Paul Muad'Dib, managed to conquer and dominate eventually the world of Dune. In the film we see him depicted with a female protagonist, which perhaps we don't know yet who this is, and I'm certainly looking forward to finding out in the upcoming re-release of Dune. In the book Dune, it was said that deep in the human conscious is a pervasive need for logical universe. That makes sense, and in many ways Dune itself is a very illogical planet. Its moons and other planets in the system twist and turn, along with those clouds that surround its host star, the beautiful CANOPUS. Maybe it's because of this nature Dune has managed to create such a valuable resource, and only on Dune could it ever have happened. "I must not fear," said Paul Muad'Dib, "for fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear, and when it's gone past there will be nothing, and only I will remain." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out these other videos we've written on other sci-fi classics like Star Wars, and also don't forget to check out our Brightest Star series where we've talked about CANOPUS in the past, and also other stars like Arcturus, Original, or perhaps Betelgeuse. Stay safe in these difficult times that we do find ourselves in. Hopefully everybody will enjoy the movie and it will end up being a success. Let's look forward to that, and I'll see you on the next one.